I am so grateful to be back here with you today, full voice and all, for Advent 3 already. We are going to talk about Ruth. We are going to talk about the prophetess Mary. So let's get into it. As with the last 2 weeks, we begin by discussing another woman in Jesus' line. Ruth, as you might remember, was married to Naomi's son, and one of them, and after he died, Ruth followed her mother-in-law back to her mother-in-law's, Naomi's, people and land and faith, and absorbed it all. She welcomed the guidance provided by Naomi along the way. And where we enter the text today is yet another example of her fidelity and listening to the suggestions made and the guidance made to her. So a little bit of background. According to Israelite law at the time, when a woman is widowed, the male next of kin is to marry her. This is called the kinsman redeemer, who provides the woman with continued protection and quality of life, the one through whom her line continues, or with whom, rather, they're both involved. In a lot of situations, in fact, the child, the firstborn, is considered or treated as, in the sense of inheriting property and such, as the firstborn of the deceased. So let's be clear that the role of the kinsman redeemer is meant to support and to provide. It is not an indication of the lowliness or weakness of women. That's not what it's about. Despite what those in religious patriarchy would want us to believe, all one need do is read the story of Ruth and Naomi to see that that view, that religious patriarchal view, is not what God intended. It was God's way of ensuring that women had what they needed to be safe from those who would harm them in their grief. It was God's way of ensuring that she had continued familiar family around her since she was no longer with her family of origin. Has it been twisted? Yes. Misused, misapplied, misinterpreted? Yes. Is it needed today as it was then? No, it isn't. It was needed at the time, given the ways of the society, and given that at that time, God was creating a society meant to be an example for other nations. Remember, Ruth is a foreign woman in Jesus's line. She, despite any other reason to do so, is adhering to the laws of the land to which her mother-in-law brought her. A grieving mother never stops grieving her child, in part because at every turn, there are reminders of the absence of her child, no matter the age. This grief, combined with a genuine love of Ruth, inspires Naomi to concoct a plan for Ruth's marriage to a kinsman redeemer. It's an interesting plan, and yet another plan that Ruth follows precisely. In essence, she proposes to Boaz after risking her own safety by somewhat taking advantage of the fact that he maybe had a little too much to eat and to drink. But she does this because she has experienced and she has taken the time to learn from the people, the women, who know that Boaz is a good and trustworthy person. So he proves himself worthy of this trust through his following actions. He sends her home with food while he goes to the one who he knows to actually be the next of kin in line before him. And albeit a bit manipulatively, mischievously, the other guy says, "Nah, go ahead." And Boaz follows through. Eventually, Ruth and Boaz conceive Obed, the grandfather of David. After faithfulness and trust, Ruth, the foreigner among the Israelites, births another in the line of Jesus. The words of Mary, the teenage prophetess, undeniably receive a lot of attention. But especially in non-Catholic spaces, I do not believe the words receive their due recognition, nor Mary her due validation as a prophetess. But that lack of recognition, lack of validation, makes neither less true. It is clear in her words that Mary was raised in the faith by a family who continued the stories of the women before her, including the foreign women like Ruth and Rahab, who were important even before the child who was forming within her. So to most Christians, a prophet is simply one who brings a specific message of God to a people for a purpose set in a time. True, a bit limited, but true. A prophet, because of their natural openness to and connection with God, also reflects God. In the moment after the initial exchange between Mary and Elizabeth, which immediately precedes this text, Mary is so overcome that she cannot stop herself from prophesying what she knows to already be true. I want to thank Ashley Wilcox for this observation. It's not one I'd previously considered, and it is significant. Mary does not say here what God will do. Instead, Mary speaks to what God has already done, what God is actively doing both in and through her. Through her. For a faithful Israelite, her words are not new. Her focus on freeing the oppressed and social justice is not New Testament God. They are Old Testament God. Well, quite frankly, they are just God. Mary is not speaking a new truth. She is speaking refreshed truth that will be, though she might not yet fully understand it, ushered in through the one actively growing inside of her. So to wrap up today, we're going to focus on two specific chunks of this prophetic song. Though the words are some of the few female words preached annually and therefore might be familiar, we, unsurprisingly at this point, will take a new look at them through a fresh lens. I encourage you, when we're done today, to go back and read the full prophecy. If something new hits you, drop a comment. I would love to know what it is. So Mary begins with this gem. My soul magnifies the Lord. I'm sufficiently intrigued by this word choice. So sufficiently, in fact, that sufficiently is not the right word, but you get the point. So significantly that I plugged magnifies into magnify into dictionary.com to see the variety of definitions that it would provide. What follows is the fourth definition, and it is my favorite. To make more exciting, intensify, dramatize, heighten. Mary's soul, which includes the indwelling of God to a depth none of the rest of us could possibly understand, reflects God to the degree that God is amplified, intensified, more enticing to all who are blessed to meet her. I am newly obsessed with this imagery. In a time in history when those who claim God would lower and control women in the name of God, to read this reminder that God so clearly spoke through this woman, lived in this woman, drew people to God's self through this woman. It's invigorating and refreshing. Mary continues reflecting and magnifying God, the true heart of God, when she then speaks these words, God has, note, has, as in already, brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Leaders in the faith at the time purported the belief that when the Messiah came, he would inevitably be one of power and authority, changing the world by elevating the Israelites over the rest of the Roman world and the world in general. The thought that the Messiah would come without fanfare and fight throughout his life not to elevate one nation over another, but to bring equity among the nations and peoples and classes, was too far out of their conceptual reach. But not for Mary. Mary got it. Her soul was open. The words of the angel were confirmed to her many times over by this point, both by what she experienced within her own body and by the words of Elizabeth. And she cannot contain the proclamation. Through her child and through her, God was ushering in justice and righting what humanity had gotten so very wrong. Could God have chosen Mary precisely because she was open to seeing God and herself in this way? I'm thinking so. Ruth, a woman from another land, a woman of courage and trust and faithfulness who God integrated into the story of the one who came down. She saw what was needed and went after it, and, with the help of her mother-in-law, succeeded. Mary, a teenage prophetess who spoke a truth many were not yet ready to hear, many still are not yet ready to hear, a truth those in power still today do not want to hear. But the truth, nonetheless. She sensed the uphill battle in front of her and in front of her unborn son, and she proclaimed it. She was called, and she spoke. In this season of expectant waiting, in this time when the ways of God are twisted and poisoned by those who fear a world of equity, we too, sisters, we too, siblings, are called. Allow your soul to magnify the Lord. Let us come together and speak into the silence, speak into the noise, the words of truth and hope to those who need it most. She is called for such a time as this, and she is speaking. Amen. Remember to like and comment and share and come back next week for Advent 4. See you then.